Hi guys, this is Jason here, and we have Chris here as well.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be doing a review of the Civivi Plethiros, or Plethiros, however you want to pronounce it. Today we have here the Damascus and sandalwood version. This does come in a couple different types. All of what we say today is going to pretty much cover all of the other versions as well. They make a carbon fiber version and a G10 version as well. So now we're just going to go over the overall details of this knife. So the overall blade length is 3.45 inches. So that's not just the cutting, that's the full length with this little choil area here. The overall length is 7.9 inches, so it's actually a little bit bigger than you might think from the pictures. The cutting edge is 3.375 inches. So again, some of that, the overall blade length is actually cut off for that finger choil you can see here. The blade width at its thickest point is 1.125 inches, so it's actually got a pretty tall grind, which makes it pretty good for slicing. The blade thickness is 0.12 inches, so it's pretty thin, and combined with that full flat grind, makes it a pretty good slicer, like I was saying. The steel, obviously, here we have is Damascus. Now, the Damascus that they're using is a combination of 9CR18 MOV and a quote-unquote confidential second steel. I don't really know what that means, but I couldn't really find much other information on it. It has 416 overall layers, which is quite a few. It's a little bit more than like a Damascus steel normally would. The Rockwell hardness of the steel is anywhere between 59 to 61, so it's pretty standard as far as Rockwell hardness goes. You can see here it's a liner lock. Now, Blade HQ is saying that this is a clip point, but it kind of looks more like almost like a Warncliffe to me. It's kind of barely got an upsweep. It might be considered a clip point. And like I said, it's got that full flat grind. It's also an Elijah Isham design, so he's a pretty popular knife designer right now. He's making some pretty weird looking stuff. So real quick, I just want to go over some of the things that comes with the knife. So it comes with this nice bag, put the knife in. Comes with a microfiber cloth, really big microfiber cloth. It's got the logo on it, as you can see. But again, really big, like for size comparison. That is a nice big size microfiber cloth. Most knives don't really come with one, but this is a gentleman's knife. It's got the Damascus steel and the sandalwood. Yeah. So you just want to keep this clean. It's a pretty knife, so you don't want to just get it all scratched up. Some knives, yeah, they're meant to get scratched up, beat up, and all that. But this is a pretty knife. While it is practical, you do want to keep it looking nice. All right, so just another thing I did forget to mention when I was going over a couple more of the details of this knife. I know you probably saw it. It is a flipper knife, so you can barely see that flipper tab there. It's actually pretty small in comparison to like a Kaiser here, which has a pretty beefy flipper tab. Honestly, I think something like this is kind of overbuilt. You don't really need that big of a flipper tab. You can see it deploys just fine, and so does such a small flipper tab in the way it's designed. Elijah Isham did a really good job kind of hiding it as well in the handle, which is really nice. Now, another thing is Civivi. Civivi is a kind of a discount brand of another brand called We Knives. They are both Chinese made, but they are actually really nice Chinese knives. They've been putting out some really good stuff. The tolerances on this seem really good. It runs on bearings, so it is a pretty smooth action. Pretty decent, actually. Now, the lockup on it here, let's say, is about 50%, but I mean, with such a thin blade stock, that's honestly pretty good. So yeah, it's got the deep carry pocket clip. It is a little longer than I normally would like, but yeah. Now, just going over some personal opinions of this knife. So far, we've pretty much just gone over the actual details and the specifications of it. First off, again, I gotta mention, I really do like Elijah Isham's work. He does a lot of weird stuff. You can see that grip there. Kind of does look pretty weird, but I do really like it. So just thinking about that, if you pretty much either like his work or you don't. It's pretty simple. It's one or the other for most people. While I'm talking about this, I'm going to get some close-ups here. so you can see some of that Damascus steel. As far as the ergonomics go of this knife, it's pretty good. It doesn't look like it would be, just looking at the handle. Here, I'll show you the handle one more time here. Just looking at that, you wouldn't think that it would be super comfortable, but really getting it in the hand, it's pretty good in the main position here where you're choked back on the knife. And you'll see he did design a little bit of a cutout here for kind of a choke up point if you really want to. It's not sharp in that area at all, so that's pretty nice. You can really choke up and do some close work. Another thing I'll mention about a nice tall blade like this is, again, it's a really good slicer. So this would make a really good food prep knife. So another great thing about that is you could see, because it's so far back here with the handle, that blade is really far up, which means that you can really get pretty close on the table. Oop, that almost cut my hand. You really can get pretty close on the table without your knuckles banging, which is nice. Now, as far as like corrosion resistance goes, a 9CR 18 MOV, I think it was, is pretty good as a corrosion resistant steel. But again, I don't know what that the second steel that they have in there is. So I can't tell you if it's going to be particularly corrosion resistant. I can tell you the one I have here hasn't corroded at all. But high carbon Damascus steel does have a tendency to corrode. So it really depends on whatever that second steel they put in there is. One thing I will say I don't particularly like about it, you could see here that centering of that blade is not perfect. I'm a big stickler for perfect centering on blades. I don't really know why, but I do like when they are perfectly centered. Some examples here. You'll see my Kaiser here, my Kaiser Zugang, I think it's called. It's pretty perfectly centered, and this has been taken apart a couple times. I haven't taken apart this the Civivi at all, and it's already off-centered directly from the factory. Now that's something I might be able to fix by adjusting the pivot, but I don't really want to mess with it. Sometimes those screws can break loose. Let's see what else. I do like it. It's very, very lightweight. I don't have an exact weight here for you, but I will include it in the description below if you want to check that out. I gotta pull that up one more time. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'm gonna move on to Chris next, and he'll tell you his some of his opinions on the knife.
Alright guys, so I'm just gonna go over some of my personal opinions on it. I'm not a huge knife person, so I'm gonna go over more of like the basic things that a non-knife person would actually be more worried about. So first things first, the pocket clip. This isn't my knife. I don't really carry this, but I will say the pocket clip on this is really flexible and nice. You can really see that flex right there. So when you're carrying this in your pocket, it's really easy to pull it out, and it's easy to put it in too. So I also like the way the knife opens. It opens really easily, and you don't really have a problem with that. Most knives do have a problem with that. Alright, so I'm just going to get a better close-up of this knife. So I am a huge fan of Damascus. So when I first saw this knife, I wasn't really feeling it. I didn't like the look of it online. But having it in hand, it has completely changed my opinion on it. I like the way the wood looks. I like the way it feels, the pocket clip, which I've already mentioned. And the Damascus steel, it's just, oh my gosh, it is incredible. I really like the look. I like the feel. You know, it does feel really nice in hand, like my brother Jason said.
Alright guys, so now we're going to talk about some size comparisons. I do have some pretty common knives, something you would see a little bit more often here. So the first knife, obviously, is going to be the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. You'll see here, laying it over top. They have pretty similar size blades, but the actual handle is much smaller, which is nice. It's more compact. If I open it up here, I'm trying to flip out a Spyderco. You'll see it actually does have a slightly longer blade here, but a shorter handle, which is nice. I've always been a big fan of the Paramilitary 2. So this is a pretty good candidate as far as size goes. Another knife we have here is the ZT0801Ti. You don't see this one as often. It was discontinued a couple years ago. But again, you'll see it's in that medium to kind of large size range. Again, it has that 3.45 inch blade. So it is a little bit larger, which is nice for a lot of tasks. Another knife we have here that I can show you is the traditional 90mm Swiss Army knife, which is obviously a classic size. Two completely different genres in knife, but you'll see here something most people have seen at least at some point in their life. And that's pretty much it as far as size comparisons go. Now I'll talk about some of the negatives of this knife that I've seen so far. Again, I don't really particularly like that blade centering. Some people might say that the style of this knife is kind of a little bit funky. It is a little large to be kind of used in public in some places. I know this wouldn't be legal in California, for example. Here in Pennsylvania, it is completely legal, which is nice. We have some relatively lax knife laws, which is kind of cool. Another thing that I think some people might find negative, the tip here is very, very, very thin and could be considered kind of fragile. If you're going to be trying to do any prying with your knife, that could break pretty easily. And the blade, again, is very, very thin. So if you're cutting up cardboard, for example, and you think you might hit a staple, and you might have some trouble with that, and you might kind of chip that blade. So you do want to avoid that. Actually, now that I think about it, 9CR18 MOV probably won't chip, but you're not going to have a fun time trying to resharpen that. The liner lock, I'm a little bit of a bigger fan of something like a frame lock. Obviously, with the wood on the side, you can't really do that. But yeah, I will say it is nice that they did include lefties here, and it is nice that they do have tip up carry instead of tip down for more of a value folder.
All right, so I don't really have too many cons about this knife, but I do want to include, while I like the look of the knife, it does have features that are not really useful, that are meant to be useful but aren't. Like, for example, this is to open it, but you can't really, there's just no point in that. While it looks nice, and couldn't flip that open. While it looks nice, it isn't really practical, and they should have just left that out, but it does look really nice. So I'm glad they kept it, but at the same time, it's not practical. All right, guys, so the price is, the MSRP is $120, but I just want to include that on Blade HQ, they have it for $102, and either way, $120 or $102. That is a really good price because, you know, this is Damascus steel. You're not going to find that for cheap. That's usually starting at like $150 for knives and maybe even $200. So obviously that's going to be the most expensive part of this knife. It has steel inliners, not titanium, but that is still pretty nice. You know, it's got that sandalwood, not a super expensive wood, so you're not going to find that, like, you're not going to have a hard time finding that on a knife for cheap, but it is still really beautiful. And, you know, because it was designed by Elijah Isham, that is, like, he is really good at designing knives. He's really famous. So his designs are usually expensive. You know, it's like Picasso, but like knife designer. So, you know, you're not going to find his knives for real cheap, but, you know, on Blade HQ, you actually will. So, again, Damascus steel, not cheap. In this, it's cheap. That's pretty nice. Yeah, so there you go.
So we're a new channel. If anybody wants to see any more of stuff like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and we'll get you some new videos, some new content. It's completely free to subscribe, and of course you can change your mind at any time if you decide you hate us for whatever reason. But I don't think that's gonna happen. So we have some cool stuff coming up. We got some cool pens. We've got plenty of knives for you to look at. Some knife candy, if you will. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.